The phone buzzed against the nightstand like something alive, and for one terrible second, Daniel forgot where he was. Then he remembered. All of it. The weight of Renee's head on his chest. The dark. The wrongness of the quiet. He reached across her to grab it, and she stirred, murmuring something he didn't catch. Carol's name lit up the screen. He almost didn't answer. He answered. "Hey," he said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "Hi, honey. I know it's late." Carol's voice, warm, a little tired, familiar in a way that made his chest hurt. "I just didn't want you to worry if you woke up and I hadn't texted." "I wasn't worried," he said, which was a lie, because he hadn't thought about her at all in the last hour, and that felt like its own kind of sin. "Mom had a rough evening. I ended up staying later than I meant to. I'm at my sister's now, crashing on her couch instead of driving back this late." Daniel went still. Beside him, Renee shifted again, her hair falling across the pillow, her breathing slow and even, asleep or close to it, 2 miles from her own house, in his bed. "You there?" Carol asked. "I'm here," he said. "Don't worry, I'm at my sister's," she said again, like she wanted to make sure it landed, like it was the whole point of the call. "I'll head home in the morning. Love you." "Love you too," he said, and the words felt like they belonged to someone else. The line went dead. He set the phone down carefully, like it might go off again if he moved too fast. "I'm at my sister's." He looked at Renee, at the curve of her shoulder, the way the sheet had slipped, the ordinary intimacy of a woman asleep beside him who had no business being there. If Renee was here, in his house, in his bed, 300 feet from the room where he and Carol had raised 2 children, then Carol was not where she said she was. She was somewhere else, with someone else, or alone, or telling a lie so smooth it hadn't even wobbled. He had spent the last hour hating himself for what he'd done. He hadn't left room to wonder what she might be doing too. Renee's eyes opened. She looked at him in the dark, still soft with sleep, not yet aware that anything had changed. "Who was that?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer right away, because the honest answer, "Your sister, telling me she's staying at your place tonight," was going to break something open that he wasn't ready to name. It hadn't started with anything you could point to. That was the part Daniel kept coming back to, later, when he tried to trace the line backward to see where he'd first stepped wrong. It started with a leaking faucet. Carol had been gone 3 weeks by then, shuttling back and forth to her mother's place 2 states over, watching a woman who'd raised 4 children slowly forget how to be alone. Daniel drove up when he could. Mostly, he held down the house and waited for phone calls that got shorter and more exhausted each time. Renee called on a Tuesday. "I know this is a weird ask," she said, "but my kitchen sink is doing something biblical, and I don't know who else to call." He went. Of course he went. She was Carol's sister, had been family for almost 30 years, long before her marriage ended, long before the divorce papers, and the empty half of her closet, and the new locks on a house that used to hold 2 names. He fixed the faucet. She made coffee neither of them really wanted, just to have a reason to sit at the table a while longer. "It's quiet now," she said, looking at her hands. "The house. I used to complain about the noise. Now I'd give anything for it back." "It gets easier," Daniel said, though he wasn't sure that was true. He'd never had to find out. "Does it?" He didn't have an answer for that, so he just stayed a little longer. That became the pattern. A call, a small task, a cup of coffee that stretched into an hour. He told himself he was doing what Carol would want, looking after her sister while she couldn't. He told Carol too in the beginning. Stopped by Renee's, her garbage disposal died. Carol would say, "Thank you for doing that," in a voice that sounded grateful and far away, already back inside her mother's confusion, her own grief. Somewhere in the third or fourth week, he stopped mentioning it as often. Not because he was hiding it. He told himself that. Just because it had become ordinary, unremarkable. A man checking in on his wife's sister while his wife was gone. But he remembered the night Renee cried at that same table. Not loudly, just tears running while she talked about how she used to think growing old meant having someone who knew all your bad mornings. And he'd reached across and put his hand over hers, the way he might have for anyone in pain. She hadn't pulled away. He hadn't either. That was the moment, if he was honest with himself later. Not a kiss, not a word out of place, just a hand that stayed where it landed a few seconds longer than comfort required, and neither of them saying anything about it, because saying something would have made it real. By the 5th week, Daniel had stopped pretending the visits were about broken appliances. Renee started cooking dinner on the nights he came by. Nothing elaborate, just enough that leaving before the plates were cleared would have felt rude. They fell into an easy rhythm of talk that surprised him with how much he'd missed it. Carol was steady and practical on the phone these days, all logistics and exhaustion. Renee wanted to talk about things that didn't matter and somehow mattered more for it. A song from years ago, a memory of a family trip nobody else in the family even remembered right. "You always did that," she said one night, pouring wine he hadn't asked for but didn't refuse. Remembered the small stuff. Carol used to say you had a filing cabinet for a brain. "Some things stick," he said. "Some people stick." She wasn't looking at him when she said it. She was looking at her glass, turning the stem slowly between 2 fingers. He should have laughed it off, changed the subject. Instead, he found himself watching her hand on that glass, a beat too long, and when he looked up, she was watching him. Watch her. Neither of them moved. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice and went quiet. The silence between them had a weight to it now, different from the comfortable kind they'd built over the past month. This one pressed. "I should get going," he said. His voice sounded thinner than he meant it to. "You said that 20 minutes ago." Not a challenge, just true. He stood anyway, and so did she, and somehow the kitchen was smaller than it had been all evening. She walked him to the door the way she always did, but this time, at the threshold, her hand found his arm. Not urgent, not demanding, just resting there, the way it had rested on the table weeks ago. "Thank you," she said. "For all of it. I don't know what I would have." She stopped. "Don't," he said, though he wasn't sure if he meant "don't thank me," or "don't finish that sentence," or "don't look at me like that." "Don't what?" He didn't answer. He let himself out into the cold instead, and sat in his car. For a long moment before starting the engine, his arm still warm where her hand had been. He drove home, telling himself nothing had happened. Nothing had been said. A hand on an arm, a sentence left unfinished. That wasn't a betrayal. That was nothing at all. But he knew, the way you know a storm is coming before the first drop falls, that the ground beneath him had already shifted, and there was no walking it back to where it had been. Carol's mother took a turn for the worse on a Thursday, which meant Carol wouldn't be back for at least another week. She told him this on the phone in a voice stretched thin as wire, and he told her to take whatever time she needed, and he meant it. And he hated himself a little for how easily the words came, while some other part of him was already thinking about dinner at Renee's that night. He almost didn't go. He sat in his driveway with the engine off for 10 full minutes, hands on the wheel, telling himself he could still turn around, that a phone call would do just as well this time. "I'm tired tonight. I'll check on you tomorrow." He didn't make the call. He walked up her steps instead. She'd made too much food again, the way she always did now. Like the cooking was for someone who used to sit across from her every night. They ate at the table. They talked about nothing. Her son's new job, a neighbor's dog that kept getting loose, and the nothing felt like it was covering something neither of them wanted to say out loud. After, she didn't walk him to the door right away. She stood at the sink, rinsing plates she didn't need to rinse, and he found himself standing beside her with a towel in his hand, drying what she'd already dried once. "Daniel." "Yeah. Look at me." He did. That was his mistake, if there was one single mistake to name. Not the weeks before, not the hand on the arm, but this. Turning his head and letting himself actually look at her. Really look. The way you look at someone when you've stopped pretending you don't want to. Her eyes were steady, waiting, not asking him to do anything, just leaving the door open and letting him decide whether to walk through it. He set the towel down. The space between them had always been small in that kitchen. Now it wasn't a kitchen anymore. It was just the distance between two people who had spent a month building toward this without ever agreeing to. Her hand came up first, resting flat against his chest, not pushing him away. "We shouldn't," he said. It came out barely above a whisper. "I know," she said, and didn't move. He kissed her. It wasn't sudden. It felt, in the moment, like the only thing that made sense after weeks of almost. Her hand curled into his shirt. His forehead came to rest against hers when it ended, both of them breathing like they'd been holding it the whole time. Then the guilt hit him so hard, it nearly buckled his knees. He stepped back first. Her eyes opened, searching his face for something. Regret or reassurance, he couldn't tell which she was hoping for. "I have to go," he said. And this time he meant it in a different way than he had every other night. He didn't remember much of the drive home except that his hands wouldn't stop shaking on the wheel. He didn't remember climbing into bed, except that it felt like lying down in a life that no longer belonged to him. He didn't call Renee to say he'd made a mistake, or that he loved his wife, or any of the things a better man might have said that same night. He didn't get the chance, because 2 hours later, in the dark, his phone lit up with a number he almost didn't recognize. Renee's number, not his own house. And for one confused second before he understood, he thought, she came here. She had. Sometime after midnight, unable to sleep, unwilling to be alone with what they'd done, she'd shown up at his door instead of staying at her own house. And he had let her in, because turning her away felt like one more unkindness added to a night already full of them. And somehow the closeness of the kitchen had followed them up the stairs, and somehow, God help him, he hadn't stopped it. And now his phone was ringing again, Carol's name lighting up the screen. And beside him, Renee opened her eyes. He let the call go to voicemail this time. He couldn't do it again. Couldn't lie there with Renee's shoulder against his and say, "Love you too," into the phone like a man with nothing to hide. Renee sat up slowly, pulling the sheet with her, watching him stare at the phone like it might go off again on its own. "You should call her back," she said quietly. "She'll worry." "She said she's at your place." He turned to look at her. "You're here. So where is she, Renee?" The question hung there longer than he expected. Renee didn't answer right away, and something about the hesitation made his stomach drop before she said a single word. "I don't know," she finally said. But it's not the first time she's said that. "What do you mean, not the first time?" "I mean," she stopped, pressed her palm to her forehead, like she was deciding how much to give him. 2 months ago. She called me, asked me to say she'd been at my place if you asked. I didn't think much of it. Sisters do that. Cover for each other. Cover for what? I don't know, Daniel. I swear I don't. I never asked. I figured it was something small. A spa day she didn't want to explain. A friend you didn't like. I didn't think. She gestured helplessly between the two of them, at the bed, at everything that had happened since midnight. I didn't think it would end up mattering like this. Daniel sat with that for a long moment, his mind running backward through months of ordinary evenings, looking for a crack he might have missed. Carol working late. Carol's phone face down on the counter more than it used to be. Carol laughing at a text and saying nothing, just Renee being Renee when he asked. Had he been so relieved to have his own reasons for guilt that he'd stopped noticing hers? Does she know? He asked. About tonight. About us. No, Renee said, too quickly, and then softer. Unless she already suspected something before there was anything to suspect. That thought landed harder than he expected. Because if Carol had started disappearing behind alibis 2 months ago, long before he'd ever touched her sister, then whatever she was hiding hadn't started as revenge for anything he'd done. It had started on its own, which meant somewhere out there tonight, his wife was living a version of this same story, with someone whose name he didn't know, and the 2 a.m. phone call hadn't been reassurance at all. It had been rehearsal. His phone buzzed again, a text this time. Sorry, missed your call. Everything okay? He stared at it, Renee watching him from the other side of the bed, both of them tangled now in secrets that no longer belonged to just one person. What are you going to do? Renee asked. Daniel didn't answer. He was already thinking of the drive to her sister's house, the one Carol claimed to be at, and how empty it was going to look when he got there. He didn't tell Renee where he was going. He just got dressed, and she didn't ask him to stay, because they both understood the night had already ended somewhere back near midnight. Whatever came after was only aftermath. The drive to Carol's sister's house took 11 minutes. He knew because he watched the clock the entire way, needing something to fix his attention on besides the question circling his mind. What he would say, what he would find, whether he even had the right to be angry. The porch light was off. The driveway was empty except for Renee's own car, still parked where she'd left it before showing up at his door. He sat outside for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled, and let himself feel the full weight of it. Not just Carol's lie, but his own. He hadn't driven here as an innocent man demanding the truth. He'd driven here as a man who'd spent the last 4 hours crossing every line he'd sworn he never would, hoping to catch his wife crossing one of her own, as if her guilt might somehow make room for his. That wasn't justice. That was just 2 people drowning and reaching for each other's ankles. His phone rang again. Carol, for the 3rd time. He answered it standing in the driveway of a house she wasn't in. Daniel, where are you? I called the house. I'm outside Renee's, he said. Where you told me you'd be, Drive, long enough that he could hear her breathing shift on the other end, hear her understand, in real time, that the story had come apart. I can explain, she said, in the voice of someone who knew she couldn't. Not really. Not in a way that made any of it smaller. So can I, he said, and the words cost him more than he expected. That's the part I need you to hear. So can I. Another silence. This one belonged to both of them. Come home, Carol finally said. Please, not to fix it tonight. I don't think either of us can fix anything tonight. Just come home and we'll sit at that table in the morning and tell each other the truth. All of it. Daniel looked up at the dark house in front of him, then back toward the road that led home. The same road he'd have driven 100 times without a second thought, and would now never drive the same way again. "Okay," he said. "I'm coming home." He didn't know, driving back in the gray hour before dawn, what the morning would hold, whether the marriage he and Carol had built over 28 years could survive what they'd both have to lay on that table, or whether they were simply two people who'd stopped choosing each other long before either of them stepped outside the lines. He didn't know what Renee would be to him now, or what it would mean to see her at every holiday for the rest of his life, the ghost of one night sitting quietly between them. What he did know was this: he had spent weeks believing he was the one keeping a secret, the one carrying the weight of a single mistake. He hadn't understood, until tonight, that everyone carries something. That a marriage isn't broken by one bad night. It's broken slowly, in all the small absences that come before it. The moments two people stop reaching for each other and start reaching for someone easier. He pulled into his own driveway as the sky began to lighten, and sat there a moment longer, gathering whatever courage a man needs to walk into a house and finally tell the truth.